The wind clawed at the mountains like a living thing, tearing through the frozen silence with an endless, howling fury. Frost gathered on Sergeant Elias Marin's beard, crusting the edges of his breath as he pressed his cheek to the rifle stock. The world around him was a sprawl of white and steel. Razor peaks, valleys drowned in shadow, the kind of landscape that devoured warmth and hope alike. He squinted through his scope, scanning the distant ridge where the alien officers were rumored to patrol. Each exhale fogged his sight for a heartbeat, reminding him that even breathing was dangerous here. His squad crouched in the snow behind him, for figures wrapped in mottled camouflage that could barely disguise the exhaustion etched into their faces. Corporal Vin was the youngest, a wiry scout with a perpetual grin that survived even the cold. Lieutenant Harlow, the unit's leader, was a silent silhouette beside a weathered datapad, his gloved fingers trembling not from fear but from frostbite. Behind them, Doc Kira adjusted a thermal patch on her wrist, muttering about blood flow and hypothermia. They were a fragment of what was once the 7th Recon, an elite group before the occupation turned them into ghosts sneaking through their own mountains. Elias checked the power indicator on his rifle scope. One bar flickered red. He sighed and wiped a layer of ice off the barrel. 3 days out here, one meal between us, and now we're hunting officers, he murmured. His voice came out rough, cracking with fatigue. Harlow didn't look up. Command says they're mapping something in this sector. If we find their relay, we find out how they keep tracking us. And then, Van asked quietly. Then we destroy it, Harlow said, still calm, still certain. Or we die trying. That was the kind of leadership Elias respected, unflinching, unadorned. Orders that tasted of truth, not hope. He had seen too many men die chasing maybes. Through the scope, a shimmer caught his attention. Movement on the ridge, subtle but deliberate. 3 tall figures in sleek black armor emerged against the pale backdrop, each one with a mirrored helmet that caught the sunlight and flung it back in sharp shards of brilliance. Even from a distance, their gait carried arrogance, measured, slow, as though the mountain itself bent to their rhythm. Elias's finger drifted toward the trigger. He knew the futility of it. Human bullets shattered on that armor like rain on glass. But instinct was harder to silence than reason. Contact, he whispered. The squad froze. The only sound was the wind. The aliens paused at the ridge's crest and turned their helmets toward the humans below. For a long, unbearable moment, no one moved. Then one of the aliens raised a hand, almost casually, and emitted a sound that didn't belong in this world, an echoing harmonic laugh that rolled down the slopes like thunder. It wasn't mockery in the human sense. It was something worse. Amusement without empathy. Triumph without effort. Elias's jaw tightened. He felt that sound scrape something raw inside him, some deep defiance that had outlived every defeat. They're laughing, he muttered. Vin swallowed hard. At us. At what we are, Harlow said grimly. To them, we're relics with rifles. Elias steadied his breath, but the mountains themselves seemed to listen, holding still under the weight of alien laughter. Snowflakes drifted lazily past his scope, catching on the rifle suppressor. Then beneath the cold silence, he felt it, a faint vibration in the snow, almost like a heartbeat. It pulsed once, twice, enough to make his teeth rattle. Did you feel that? Doc Kira whispered. Elias didn't answer. He kept the scope fixed on the ridge. The aliens had stopped laughing. Their heads tilted, as if they, too, sensed something stirring beneath the ice. The mountain trembled again, softer this time, but unmistakable. The ridge shimmered briefly, light bending in ways that made no sense. Elias's breath caught in his throat. Whatever this was, it wasn't human, and it wasn't over. The crack came again, sharper this time, like the sky itself splitting along an invisible seam. Elias lifted his head from the rifle for only a second, but the sound seemed to wedge itself directly into his skull. The air above the ridge shimmered as though heated, impossible in this glacial wasteland. He blinked hard, unsure whether it was a mirage or a warning. The aliens, however, reacted instantly. The officer at the center stiffened, visor tilting upward toward the distortion with unmistakable confusion. Their kind rarely displayed uncertainty. Seeing it now sent a jolt of unease through Elias's spine. Lieutenant Harlow moved closer, his breath forming clouds that spiraled away in the wind. Eyes open. Something's happening. His voice remained level, but there was a spark buried beneath it, a calculation Elias recognized, the kind he relied on to stay alive. Another crack resonated, followed by a faint metallic whine that made Vin wince and press a hand to his ear. "Is that coming from their helmets?" the young scout asked, voice tight. Elias didn't answer. The officers stood frozen, heads turning erratically as though trying to track a sound the humans couldn't hear. Their mirrored visors reflected the mountains, the snow, the sky, then fractured the reflection in a sudden, violent burst. The first helmet shattered outward with a sharp, crystalline explosion, sending jagged shards scattering across the ridge. The alien inside dropped to its knees with a guttural hiss, clutching at the remnants of its headgear. A split second later, the other two officers' helmets ruptured as well, each explosion echoing the next. The ridge glittered with metallic fragments that looked disturbingly like glass in the pale sunlight. Vin flinched. "Holy hell, did we do that?" "No," Elias said quietly, though part of him wished they had. A weapon that effective would have changed everything. But the humans had fired nothing. No sound preceded the blasts except the strange atmospheric cracks. Whatever had destroyed those helmets came from elsewhere. The aliens writhed in the snow, not dead but overwhelmed. Their limbs spasmed in irregular bursts, like puppets whose strings had been abruptly tangled. Without their helmets, their mottled skin was exposed, pale, ridged, and quivering under some invisible assault. Doc Kira edged forward, crouching beside Elias. "Neurological overload?" she whispered. "Those helmets are more than armor. They're interconnected systems. If something fried the network..." Harlow cut her off. "Speculation later. We need intel, not guesses." He studied the ridge with narrowed eyes, calculating risk versus necessity. "Elias, take Vin. Move up carefully. See if they dropped anything useful before reinforcements sweep in." Elias pulled himself from the snow with stiff limbs, rifle slung but ready. The climb was treacherous, each step threatening to plunge him through a crust of ice. Vin followed, breathing hard but steady, his earlier bravado replaced with a grim determination. Halfway up, Elias paused. The air vibrated faintly, a low hum threading through the wind. It wasn't natural. It wasn't even subtle. The closer they came to the ridge, the more insistent the hum grew, resonating in his bones. When they reached the summit, the source became unmistakable. Behind the fallen officers, partly buried beneath an avalanche of its own making, something pulsed with intermittent waves of bluish light. The object was hexagonal, metallic, and humming with the same frequency that had rattled the valley. It looked damaged, cracked along one side, sparking faintly against the snow. Vin inhaled sharply. "That did this?" Elias crouched beside the nearest alien, careful yet unflinching. The officer's exposed skin twitched in sync with the beacon's pulses. The thing was still active, still affecting them. Maybe still gathering data. He exchanged a look with Vin, both men understanding the same truth at once. Whatever had shattered those helmets wasn't finished. And if the device decided to change targets, humans might be next. Elias steadied his breath. "We need to call this in. And we need to move. Fast." Elias descended the ridge with measured steps, the hum of the damaged device pulsing behind him like a heartbeat that didn't belong to any living thing. Vin trailed close, glancing back at the flickering object as though it might lunge after them. When they reached the others, Harlow immediately read the tension in their faces. He didn't waste breath on questions. He only gestured for them to speak. Elias explained what they had found. The cracked machine, the rhythmic pulses, the way the alien spasms synchronized with the light. As he spoke, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint, unsettling resonance. Even down here, the device's song crawled beneath their skin. Harlow pressed his lips together thoughtfully. A beacon of some kind. Maybe a command node. If the officers were linked to it, a malfunction could have ricocheted through their helmets. That's not just a malfunction, Kira murmured. Something in that machine is still active. And whatever it's broadcasting is strong enough to override their neural safeguards. Vin rubbed his gloved hands together, trying to warm fingers that had grown visibly unsteady. If it can break them, it could break us. We're not exactly more durable. Elias considered that, but something else gnawed at him. We stood close to it. Close enough that we should have felt more than a vibration. But we didn't collapse like they did. Kira blinked, surprised. Human neurobiology is different, but not that different. Maybe. Her words stalled as she searched for an explanation that didn't sound like wishful thinking. Maybe the signal isn't calibrated for us. Harlow didn't look reassured. Calibrated or not, the enemy will come looking for those officers. And when they find them like that, they'll assume we're responsible. The unspoken truth hovered between them. Humans didn't have weapons capable of shattering alien helmets or frying command networks. If the aliens believed the humans had suddenly acquired such power, retaliation would be swift and merciless. We need to decide what to do with the device, Harlow said. Destroy it or disable it before reinforcements arrive. Elias looked back up the ridge, with a faint blue flicker pulsed like a beacon calling to anyone who could sense it. It's broadcasting something. If they detect the signal, we'll have company soon. Kira frowned, thinking, if we could force an overload, controlled, not chaotic, it might disrupt their local network. By resistance forces some breathing room. Vin stared at her incredulously. Or it could vaporize the ridge and all of us with it. Risk is our constant companion, Kira replied dryly. But if that thing was meant for psychological warfare, fear induction, cognitive suppression, its failure might be a chance we can exploit. Harlow turned to Elias. What's your read? Elias exhaled slowly. He didn't like gambling with unknown tech, but empty-handed retreat would doom them anyway. If we leave it intact, the aliens recover it and fix it. If we destroy it now, we lose the only edge we've seen in months. Overloading it might disorient them enough for us to escape, and maybe cripple their control grid in this region. Harlow nodded once, decision settling over him like armor. Then we overload it. Elias, you and Kira will handle the device. Then keep watch. I'll monitor comms. They climbed the ridge again, the ascent heavier this time with purpose rather than fear. The device greeted them with another pulse, bright and cold, as if acknowledging their return. Kira knelt beside it and carefully brushed snow from the fractured plating, revealing intricate seams and flickering conduits. It's unstable, she whispered. Even touching the wrong point could trigger a surge. Then touch the right ones, Elias said, though his voice softened at the edges. He trusted her hands more than his own in this moment. She began rerouting exposed filaments with the precision of a surgeon, her breath trembling but her focus absolute. Each adjustment deepened the device's glow, its hum rising in pitch. Vin called out softly from his lookout point. Movement in the trees. They're coming. Harlow's voice steadied them like a tether. Finish it. Now. The device's vibration grew harsher, resonant enough that Elias felt it through the soles of his boots. Kira's fingers hovered over the final conduit. Once I bridge this, the overload sequence starts. We'll have seconds. Do it, Elias said. Kira connected the filaments. The device flared brilliantly, its pulse quickening like a frantic heartbeat. Elias grabbed her arm, pulling her away as the ridge trembled beneath them. Behind them, the machine began to scream. The scream from the device rose into a piercing, oscillating wail as Elias and Kira scrambled down the ridge, boots slipping on the unstable crust of snow. Vin waved them on frantically before retreating to cover, the whites of his eyes stark against his frost-reddened skin. The pulsing light behind them intensified, flickering in rapid bursts that cast elongated shadows across the mountain face. Elias felt each pulse strike his chest like a physical blow, but he forced himself onward, half pulling Kira until her footing steadied. Harlow met them midway, bracing Elias's shoulder before sweeping his gaze toward the tree line. Dark shapes moved between the trunks, Reinforcements swift and purposeful. Positions, Harlow ordered, voice taut but controlled. They'll be on us in moments. Elias dropped beside a collapsed boulder and raised his rifle. The cold bit through the metal and into his bones, but the familiar weight steadied him. Beside him, Kira steadied her breathing, her hands trembling from exertion and the lingering resonance of the device's proximity. Vin set up to the right, eyes sharp once more, his earlier fear sharpened into resolve. They all owed one another too much to falter now. The first alien soldier broke through the tree-line, its armor gleaming with the same mirrored sheen as the officers' helmets. It paused upon seeing the humans, mandibles tightening with unspoken rage. More soldiers emerged behind it, their formation disciplined, their steps synchronized. Elias braced himself, waiting for the opening volley. But before the aliens fired, they hesitated, their helmets tilting toward the ridge. The device emitted a final, strangled burst of light, brilliant enough to paint the snow in spectral blue. Then the pulse came. It struck like a shock wave with no wind, passing through flesh and bone as though they were translucent. Elias's vision blurred, then sharpened again. A pressure filled his skull, but it was bearable, like the echo of a forgotten memory. The aliens did not fare the same. Their formation buckled instantly. Helmets sparked, limbs convulsed, and their weapons fell useless into the snow. One by one, they collapsed, arms twitching in disjointed patterns, their movements hollow echoes of the officers earlier on the ridge. Elias lowered his rifle slowly, heart pounding. "They're down," he murmured. "All of them." Kira exhaled shakily, relief softening her rigid posture. The overload worked. It inverted the neural link, hit them harder than the officers. Harlow surveyed the field with cautious skepticism before finally letting out a long, controlled breath. "We take the victory, small as it is. But we move. Their network will notice the disruption, and they'll send more." Vin slung his pack, nerves returning in the form of restless energy. "Where to?" "East," Harlow answered. "There's a ravine 2 kilometers out. If we reach it before they regroup, we disappear again." Elias took point as they began their retreat, guiding the squad through the labyrinth of snowdrifts and fallen pines. With each step, he felt the lingering vibrations of the pulse fading, leaving behind only the muffled crunch of snow beneath their boots. Something had shifted, not just on the ridge, but within him. For the first time in months, he felt an ember of possibility. Humans had survived what the aliens could not. Humans had adapted, endured, and outmaneuvered them without firing a single shot. As they reached the edge of the ravine, the sky began to darken with an approaching storm. Elias glanced back only once, watching the ridge shrink into the distance. The shattered helmets glinted faintly in the dying light, scattered like broken crowns across the snow. Kira stepped beside him, her breath warm in the freezing wind. "Do you think they'll understand what happened?" "No," Elias said, adjusting his rifle before following the others down the slope. And that's the part that scares them. He didn't know what waited beyond the ravine. More battles, more losses, more desperate gambles. But the ridge had proven a truth the aliens had never believed. Humanity was far harder to break than they imagined.